I did an executive training course years ago, and it was an all women executive training course, and a ton of the content was on imposter syndrome. And I actually found it made it worse. I left the training, and I was in my head because I literally spent a week with women talking about how we're all in our heads.
Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship by Venture for Canada. Venture for Canada is a national charity on a mission to foster the entrepreneurial skills and mindsets of young Canadians. Our vision is a Canada where young people can equitably realize their entrepreneurial potential to help build one of the most prosperous entrepreneurial ecosystems in the world.
Hello, Venture for Canada community. In the studio with me today, I have Rachel Zimmer, and I'm very excited to introduce you to this powerhouse. Rachel Zimmer is the co-founder and CEO of Simple Ventures, a new Canada-first startup studio. Before this, Rachel successfully exited a B2B marketplace business, Five Crowd. She was also brought in by Entrepreneur First, the Reid Hoffman and Patrick Collison Accelerator Studio, to launch North American operations. In that role, she recruited and supported more than 120 founders that have gone on to build more than 25 venture-backed companies. She has been named Emerging Entrepreneur by Toronto Board of Trade and 30 Under 30 by Marketing Magazine. We are very honored to have you join our community today, Rachel.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Okay, first, I want to dive into a little bit about the company, about Simple Ventures. So can you explain the model to me and talk a little bit about the independent venture studio model versus the corporate one?
Absolutely. So there's different ways to start a company. You can go it alone, bootstrap. You can go to a venture capital and, a venture capital firm and say, hey, here's my idea, here's where we're going, and get a check written into your business from a VC partner. A studio is kind of in the middle where you get the benefits of funding like a VC, and then you get the partnership and support through a platform to essentially, increase your probability of success to build. So that's kind of the way to think about studios. And what we have sought to do at Simple Ventures is be really, really focused, building 3 to 5 companies per year, focused on a very specific thesis, which is what we call concept arbitrage. So we study what's going on around the world, and we see, what is innovation that is not yet in Canada. We analyze whether there's a reason for it not being in Canada. And when we find the needles in the haystack, the diamonds, we get really excited, vet those concepts, test them in Canada. And when we get enough conviction on market traction, we then fund and launch them in the Canadian market. We do all that ideation and vetting work. And then from there, we'll then find an amazing founder CEO to partner with us to launch and take the business to market and scale it up. So that's our model and how we structure it.
Rachel, can you tell me a little bit about the investors and their role that they play and kind of what's in it for them?
There's different ways big companies get involved in company creation. And if I can maybe share a couple types of structures, one would be what Highline Beta does in Canada. So they have amazing corporate partners, and there's a consulting arm where they actually go in-house to those big companies, understand what their needs are, and through that consulting work, which is paid, if they find an amazing idea, fantastic, they partner and co-create and launch that business together. So there's kind of the consulting path. I think McKinsey does something similar. A lot of the big consulting firms will do that, Deloitte and so on. Another way that large enterprise, innovation can happen is there's actually like in-house idea labs. So for example, Johnson & Johnson has J Labs, which is like an in-house group that basically is doing ideation. They understand the corporate priorities. They have connection points to the company. They literally have like company emails so they can, navigate internally, and they will basically fund, ideate concepts directly based on what the company's needs are. We're a different structure, which is that we're actually completely unaffiliated with large companies. We have structured our studio such that we have a sidecar fund And the fund has a lot of amazing contributors to the fund. One group are former founder operators. So, some of our investors include, Joanna Griffiths, the founder of Nix, my co-founder, Mike Ketchen, the founder of Wealthsimple, and a long list of 30 plus other incredible founder operators from across Canada. So that's one contributing group to our fund. The second group are investors, but they happen to be companies such as Sobeys, the founders of Halo Health, and so on. And these companies, align incentives with us by investing in our fund and operate as a strategic partner to Simple Ventures. And what that looks like, or what that means, is if we're creating a company and there's a way that a Sobeys can give a superpower to that company, imagining it's leveraging any of the assets that are in Sobeys' portfolio, all of a sudden you can help the company go from, maybe $1 million in revenue to $20 million in revenue through distribution or through strategic partners or through preferential access to something. And so it's about having aligned incentives with those corporate partners. Mm-hmm. However, the way we've structured it is it's not that thou shalt build XYZ for, with a company mandate. It's more truly about aligned incentives with, Canada's very best founder operators and large corporates.
Can you give us, thank you, that was a great description. I really appreciate that. So can you give me an example of an aligned incentive, maybe something that has gone to market already?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So one of our companies is called Alma Care, and it's a postnatal services company. And so essentially, if you're a new family and you're looking for postnatal support, traditionally, in our parents' generation, you'd stay at the hospital for up to 7 days after giving birth, and a nurse would show you how to breastfeed and how to do all the things. Now, unfortunately, given the contraction in the healthcare system, the average family stays at the hospital for less than 24 hours. And so with that, there's created a gap in care where families are looking to fill that both with their own family support and friend support, but also with paid care. So Alma Care is, aiming to be the national leader in postnatal care, which has both retreat services where you can actually go stay at a center, and there's 24/7 care, from lactation consulting to night nurses to all of the food and nutrition that's optimized for postpartum and so on. And then there's also called legitimate night nurses, so vetted, trained folks that bring the program of the retreat to the home. So that's Alma Care. So you can kind of think and say how does that, how do the the Simple Ventures SV investors help? Now, if you think about some of the folks, Joanna Griffiths, who built Nix, an amazing partner to the business, as she's got, she knows the segment super, super well, having built a women's, underwear business, and really understands the target demo and so on. Halo Health, a network of 400 doctors across Canada, including many obstetricians, that see this gap in care, that can give Alma, the support, whether it's through recommendations or whether it's through advice on how to make sure the program is well structured. And then Sobeys, if I pick on, specific examples, Farm Boy is in the Sobeys portfolio, and Alma has lots of really great amenities in the experience that have been curated by Sobeys or Farm Boy, so that parents can have, all the things that they need in those first few weeks postpartum. So some of the advantages or supports from the corporates are direct and very clear. There's a little bit more indirect, like some of the ones I just spoke to.
So interesting. So when your team is researching internationally, looking for ideas that need to come to Canada, are you thinking about what's going to be a good fit with our investors? And do you sort of pitch them on that, or how does that work?
No, we really look for great ideas independent of the Simple Ventures platform. So just what's an amazing concept that's not yet in Canada, with good unit economics, a path to profitability. It's a decent, scalable market. And we do look, I'll call it, for the Simple Ventures right to win. So what is through the investor network, through our core team and so on, why do we have an unfair advantage to win in building this business? So I think we don't, the nuance is that we don't fund something based on an investor, but we view that as like a superpower that could turbocharge a concept.
Ooh, that's such a great description. Okay, I got you. I think the next thing I'd love to chat with you about is, based on your expertise in Simple Ventures and also your expertise at Entrepreneur First, what does it take to build a successful business in Canada? So perhaps compared to other markets, what are some of the barriers? What are some of the benefits? What have you noticed?
So we'll actually go back to my founding journey because I think, my boots on the ground experience of we revenue funded our company and we hired out our sales team and our development team and then scaled up the business all based and HQ'd out of Toronto. And I think the benefits then have just been amplified now. So one of the benefits specifically to Toronto is within an hour radius of the downtown core. So through the DVP, the 401, like literally if you draw a little circle, you can access most multinationals through a 1 hour drive. Whereas if you think of the US, you have to like hop on a plane and go to all these different hubs. And so what an amazing test market that you can actually access and have in-person relationship building with a bunch of different companies. And once you get great case studies, very easily export those to the US. Even though we happen to be in Canada, there's no reason you can't have customers around the world. So when we did that, when we were building, we started with this amazing, like focused, curated, Toronto-based customer base, and then we use that to expand internationally, which was really effective. So I think one is just like access in a very localized way, and you can use that to scale up. I think another benefit is that the government has done a lot. I know there's been some storm clouds over the government this year with, the productivity issues and so on, and taxes, capital gains. But there are some really great ways that the government helps founders. One example is IRAP, which is a grant that you can use for innovation and development. Another is a tax credit called SHRED, where for every dollar you spend in development costs, you can get a good portion of that back. And so there are things that are happening where if you can start in Canada, our currency is much lower than places like the US. So if you can be really focused and tactical here, I think that works. I think maybe the biggest drawbacks I'll share. One is that our funding climate is nowhere near like our American counterparts. And so just to give you a tangible example, when we were running Entrepreneur First out of Toronto, 70% of the funding came from American investors. And we went out to the Canadian ecosystem saying, hello, we've got amazing companies, check them out. We're going to give you preferential access. You can see them. And we'd usually do that for a time bound period. And then we'd go right to the US. And we actually literally like flew our founders, brought them down to the Valley, into New York to meet with, tier one and tier, various angels and so on, just because we recognize that there's greater risk appetite. There's just also way more capital to get businesses off the ground. So I think that's one constructive or challenging thing. And I think that the talent market in both Canada and the US have strengths and drawbacks. Mm-hmm. So I'll kind of put that as a plus and a minus for both markets.
Mm-hmm. Would you say then, if you were talking to someone about what it takes to build a very successful venture in Canada, that it would be impossible to do without US funding? I would obviously be.
I wouldn't say that. I'd say, what's the problem you're solving? And then what's the best path to solve that problem? Maybe it's a bootstrap lifestyle business. Maybe it's a massive venture scale business that's going to have a global impact. And I think what we're doing at Simple Ventures is all about being Canada first in our thinking. And, one of the reasons why we led our strategy with capital and actually curating our fund first is because we know how hard that is in the market. And so being really diligent and focused and doing that is key. And I think one other reason I wouldn't say that you have to have US capital is, I think gone are the days of 2021 where, zero interest in rate environment, anything and anyone was getting funded. I think now there's a much more diligent and scrutinous look at profitability, unit economics, and so on. And so I do think there's the rise of just like common sense, like good funded businesses. And I do think there's investors both north and south of the border that are receptive to that.
You talked about the talent market. So that's the business we're in. And I would love you to tell us how do you become top talent? What is the sort of career advice you would have or maybe, it's hard to give advice to everybody, but what are some of the things you've learned along the way from your experience and also personally, as well as what you've seen out there? What do people need to do? What experiences might they not think about as benefiting an entrepreneurial sort of journey, entrepreneurial thinking, entrepreneurial talent? Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Happy to share. And I'll maybe share like the generals and maybe I can give some tactical or like tangible examples to bring it to life. I think the first is follow great people. more than I've done some campus recruiting lately, and I hear folks say like, I want to go into tech or I want to go into consulting, and I think that that's great. There might be reasons why you're attracted to those areas, but I think you having a focus on who is an amazing person or team that I can learn from. Have they won? Are they consistent winners? Have they had a great trajectory and track record that you could join forces with and learn from? And I think, going back to my experience in Entrepreneur First, I, was interested in potentially staying in the accelerator path. I was also interested in building again and, seeing who was behind Entrepreneur First, Ella, the Collison founders, the Collison brothers, the founders of Stripe, Reid Hoffman. It's like when you see the curation of folks behind such an amazing platform, it made it really compelling to, to be drawn to that and, have an amazing learning experience. So I think the first is follow great people. And it kind of ties to the second, which is I think folks that put themselves in incredibly uncomfortable learning experiences where, they're over their skis, it's a challenge, but they have the self-awareness to recognize when that is the case and then level themselves up in those moments. I think those individuals, have a tendency to be top talent. And if I think about specific examples of that, I'll pick on myself to be a bit vulnerable here. When I was starting my business in a while ago, I'll give a year, but I was really young. I was 24, had never sold before. I had a bit of P&L management experience, having been like an assistant brand manager and brand manager at Johnson & Johnson, but I was not a, multi-decade leader with lots of scar tissue and learnings under my belt. And I had a bad sale. I went in, totally flopped it, did not do well. And I walked away being like, oh, wow, I don't have the toolkit or frameworks and chops to, actually excel in this. And so I did a couple of things. One was called a friend who worked at Salesforce. He was an account executive, also quite junior. And he was really kind and spent time with me and my co-founder and gave us all the tools, all the frameworks, role played with us, ripped us apart. And, that was one like tangible way that we, that we invested to level up. A second way, and this one was quite lucky. A leader I really looked up to was taking a career break, and he offered to spend a bit of time with us in the first year of our business. And he actually spent like up to 10 to 20 hours super kindly mentoring us. And he actually came to meetings. He'd help us prep for the meetings. He'd rip us apart after the meetings. And I think just knowing when you're over your skis, you go back to that analogy, and you know that you need to aggressively level up. It's how do you make sure you put a development plan in place for yourself to get there immensely quickly, that you can just like run hard and kind of address that. And I think that accelerated learning piece and focusing on that is super important. So the first is follow great people. The second is investing in yourself for accelerated learning. It's all that stuff of being over your skis. And I think the third thing, this is so simple, but yet so few people do this. Your actions and words need to match. And I find very often in any circumstance, it's often, someone says they're going to do something and they don't actually follow up delivering on it. Or they, they comment on something, but then in reality, the reality is quite different. And so I think at any seniority, when you commit to doing something, whether it's an offhand tiny thing or a big thing, make sure you follow through and deliver. And, what you're subtly doing is showing people they can trust you. And that, when someone, says, if I commit to doing something, it's like, oh yeah, Rachel said she's going to do that. And I know she will, because that's been even in the small things, in the trajectory that's been seen there. So the first, accelerate or follow great people. Second is accelerated learning and investing in that. And the third is just having your actions and words match.
Those are really, really great. I love that. The second one is so fun because it reminds me of an earlier episode we did about failure, and with a consultant of a failure company, and really sort of the response to failure, or the response maybe to something that didn't go your way, really leaning into that with curiosity, as opposed to, well, maybe after you pick yourself up and lick your wounds a little bit. That's really practical advice. It's every time, it's sort of how to think about failure. Failure is a learning moment, really. I mean, we kind of know that, but it's hard to feel it in the moment. So it's great advice. And then, integrity, I think, is what the last one reminds me of. Really doing what you said you were going to do is incredibly important to me with my staff. When we talk about, when I take on a new staff member, we talk about, okay, what does trust mean to you? What do you need in a manager? And then I talk to them about what I need in a staff, and doing what they say they're going to do is one of the things I talk about. So I really appreciate that. Those are super practical. Thanks, Rachel. And I'd love to talk about and listen to you explore with us a little bit the topic of work-life integration and avoiding burnout, maybe even also touching on imposter syndrome and some of these things that are very common in our community amongst, I think, probably all communities, but amongst young folks entering really uncertain markets, entering spaces that are very ambitious and often aggressive. Um, yeah, what's been your experience there? So, in a little bit, anything to give advice about imposter syndrome and how maybe you've dealt with it or you've seen people deal with it, and also just that work-life integration. I don't want to say balance because I don't really think that's a thing, but how you deal with that. It's a two-part.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, imposter syndrome, there was a question. I was, again, doing campus recruiting a few weeks ago, and the question was like, when did you know you made it? And I was like, I haven't made it. It's like, what are you talking about? And so it's one of those things where I feel like um, I'm so goal oriented, and I've learned that from amazing mentors in my career, where if you can just stay laser focused on what you're trying to achieve and reflect on what skills or tools you need to assemble in order to get there. I think staying really, really focused on that versus getting in your head around like, should I be here? Do I have a right to be here? Do I have the abilities to be here? Kind of getting that talk track out of your head and focusing more on where am I trying to go and what do I need to do to get there. The second thing I'll maybe think about on imposter syndrome, I did an executive training course years ago, and it was an all women executive training course, and a ton of the content was on imposter syndrome. And I actually found it made it worse. I left the training, and I was in my head because I literally spent a week with women talking about how we're all in our heads, and I reflected that what a bad thing to put the spotlight on. So it's almost like, don't think about it. Don't have the imposter syndrome talk track. Focus on what am I trying to do? How do I get there? And I think if you just kind of squash the topic, it can propel accelerating to get you to feeling confident in the space you're in. So that's the imposter syndrome piece. And then I think on the work-life balance, I think just going back to self-awareness, knowing what gives you vitamins, knowing what your operating system is and what your MO is. And, I am a highly intense human, and I pour myself into anything, whether it's like a personal project or a book I'm reading. Like when I do something, I'm 110% of the way, or 150% of the way into it. I don't do things well, consistently at 80% across my life. And so knowing that about myself, it was something I really struggled with, especially early on in my career, because I think a lot of advice we get is like, your career in life is a marathon. You need to give 80% to each thing so you can have equal buckets across the board. And I very quickly learned that I'm different. I'm just wired differently. And so a couple things fill my cup. And I know that I'm at my happiest in kind of two ways. One is this idea of interval training instead of a marathon. So I go really, really hard for a while and then catch my breath, and go really, really hard for a while and catch my breath. So practically what that's looked like is I've taken 3 6-month sabbaticals. I've traveled through Africa and through Asia and through South America. And in each of those periods, it's an amazing point to reflect and zoom out and meet amazing people, have cool experiences, and then make sure that when I come back, I dive in very intentionally in the place that I want to go. And it's easy to say that now from, with some savings in the bank, but I even did that early on in my career and went into a bit of debt to do that. And so for me, prioritizing that interval training was incredibly, incredibly important to make sure I was intentional in it and came back refreshed and hungrier the next time. Related to that, on one of my interval trainings, when I was traveling through India, I met some really incredible folks. And one was someone from Germany who had been in the army for a number of years, and he had 4 buckets that I've stolen that I think really land for me around when I'm at my happiest. It's when all 4 of these buckets are filled. The first is adventure. And I think the day-to-day, typical routine can sometimes hamper that, excuse me. Mm-hmm. And adventure is incredibly important to me to feel fulfilled. And that can come in a lot of ways. It can come through the startup world. It can come through rock climbing. It can come through being in India, but just having adventure in some way, shape, or form. The second is feeling challenged. And this usually comes in the form of work, but it doesn't have to. It could also come in the form of a hobby or a project. The third is impact. So I need to feel like my actions, again, could be work, could not be work, but is having a positive impact in the world. And I drive immense fulfillment from that. And then the fourth, I'd argue, and most important one for me is relationships. And so that's, my spouse, my family, my friends, and having just really high quality and compassionate relationships that I care deeply about and kind of feel that reciprocated. So those are kind of a few thoughts. Squash imposter syndrome. Stop talking about it. Just focus on what you're trying to achieve and then level yourself up to get there. This idea of interval training. So really, for me, knowing myself and that I'm more of an interval trainer versus a marathon runner, and then just picking the buckets that are important to you so that when, things are feeling off and not clicking, you can dissect the why and make sure you fill the right cup.
You should, you could be my coach. This is so good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Those are really, really good. I wanted to ask about the idea of sabbaticals. I've thought a lot about the idea of this idea of a sabbatical, and is there a way to build that into corporate life and the world and with staff? And I don't know. Are there models out there? The only time I've had any version of that is mat leaves, parental leaves. And that just isn't enough because that's not fair. But that was it's not fair to anyone who is choosing not to have children. And I think it's funny because that did give me a bit of that feeling of being away and sort of that refreshed, a little bit of a different perspective, although you have a child. So anyway, what are your thoughts on that? Have you seen that work? Do you have that at Simple Ventures?
We're trying at Simple Ventures. We're still in year one. We're a baby of an organization. And I think aspirationally would love to get there and build that into our calendar, if you will, so that there are really intense periods and periods where we can catch our breath. I think that's definitely the goal. And then to answer your question on models, I think the closest I've seen where it could be possible, but you need immense flexibility, is more project-based work. Mm-hmm. So I think in the corporate world, it's a bit more challenging where you have a mandate that's an always on mandate. So if you step out of the organization, someone else basically has to pick up your, what you were doing, which is challenging to kind of bake into a process. Challenging for parental leaves and organizations trying to navigate that. But I think for project-based organizations like consulting or things like this, in theory, if you can optimize it so that, you wrap a project, you have a leave during a period, in theory, you can essentially not have that transition fall into somebody else. So that's the closest I think I've seen folks do it successfully, but then there's other challenges where you're in customer service, and if you're not there, they'll choose someone else. And so long-winded way of saying, I don't think that we've nailed it as a society. I think European culture is much closer, just with more vacation in the calendar. But it's something that I'd love to try and crack.
Yeah, because I feel like it could be really interesting what we could, to almost extend the concept of a parental leave, but have it so that you could contribute perhaps every paycheck to the idea of a sabbatical, and then you take it and then we backfill the way we do with parental leaves. I really think I'd love to. I'm gonna start talking about that with my team because I think it would be really interesting to just figure out and just explore.
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
Cool. Okay, Rachel, is there anything else that you would want to share with the Venture for Canada community?
What we're trying to do at Simple Ventures is give founders the highest probability of success building a company. And, with our capital, with our platform and vetted concepts, there's a lot of things in our formula that give our companies an unfair advantage and increase that probability of success. And pulling on the point of, surround yourself with great people early on in your career that you can learn from. One of the things we're investing in is what we're calling a founder associate program. So this is a structured program through Simple Ventures whereby if you're, early on in your career and you want to learn from an amazing founder and be in an environment like Simple Ventures where you can build your network, observe what good looks like, and observe when the mistakes happen and how to pick up from them. We're looking for highly ambitious, organized, and talented folks to join our ventures in this kind of structured way. And so reach out, ping me on LinkedIn if this is of interest. share some information about yourself, the type of companies that you'd be a good fit for. I think one of the challenges is we're recruiting now for companies that are not yet formed. So we're always on in this recruiting muscle because we want to have our eye on who are amazing folks. And then when the ventures are ready, be able to pair them accordingly. And so that's maybe the final thing I'll leave everyone with, which is if this kind of founder associate program and role would be of interest, don't be shy, please reach out.
That's an incredible offer and invitation. Thank you. And we'll make sure to make that really clear in the show notes and the link. And obviously your contact information via LinkedIn will be in there. Thank you, Rachel, for sharing so much practical advice and the wealth of knowledge that you have and your super interesting model with Simple Ventures. It's just really exciting. I wish you all the best, and I hope our paths cross again.
Me too. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our socials and through our email list. And be sure to subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss our next episode. Have feedback on today's episode? Let us know directly in the app. Thanks again for listening and for joining the new wave of entrepreneurs. Till next time.